I booked the Airbnb for me and my partner because we wanted a quiet weekend away. The listing looked perfect. A small house on the edge of town, modern furniture, cozy bedroom, and a little kitchen where we could cook. The photos looked clean, simple, and private, and the reviews were short but positive. Nothing seemed strange about it. It was cheaper than most hotels in the area, and having an entire place to ourselves sounded better than sharing walls with strangers. When we arrived, the house was just like the pictures. Fresh paint on the outside, simple garden, quiet neighborhood. Inside, everything looked neat and tidy. A gray couch sat in the living room, the kitchen had stainless steel appliances, and the bedroom looked inviting with crisp sheets and fluffy pillows. At first, I felt relieved. Seemed like a good choice. We unpacked and got comfortable. The evening passed quietly. We made dinner, watched a show on my laptop, and eventually got ready for bed. That's when I noticed something odd. I was lying on my back, staring up at the ceiling, and I saw a smoke detector right above the bed. It wasn't unusual, but the design struck me. It looked bulkier than a normal smoke detector, almost like a small dome. I didn't say anything at first, but the thought stuck in my head. I turned on my phone's flashlight and looked closer. On the underside of the smoke detector, just barely visible, was a tiny dark circle that didn't look like part of a sensor. It looked like a lens. My stomach dropped. I got up and stood on the bed to look closer. The more I stared at it, the less it looked like a normal smoke detector. The placement itself felt wrong. Why would a detector be centered directly above the bed instead of by the door or in the hallway? I realized what it was. It wasn't just a smoke detector. It was a camera disguised as one. That discovery made the room feel different instantly. I started scanning the rest of the bedroom. In the opposite corner, near the closet, there was another smoke detector, but this one faced the bed at an angle. I pulled my phone out again and shined the light on it. Same thing, a small, dark circle that looked exactly like a camera lens. The realization hit me like a wave. We had been moving around the room normally since arriving, completely unaware. Changing clothes, unpacking, lying in bed. All of it could have been recorded. My skin crawled at the thought. I started searching the rest of the house. In the living room, another smoke detector sat above the couch. In the kitchen, one hung near the table. Every single one had the same suspicious lens built into it. They weren't smoke detectors at all. The entire house was rigged with cameras, hidden in plain sight. At that point, my brain felt like it was buzzing. I thought about who was watching, where the footage went, and how long it had been set up. The idea of someone monitoring us in real time, maybe even laughing at how normal we'd acted, made my chest tighten. I unplugged my laptop and checked it too. Paranoia had fully set in. I checked every outlet, every lamp, even behind the TV. I found no other obvious cameras, but the smoke detectors were enough. That was all the proof I needed. The worst part was the sense of exposure. The house, which had felt like a private escape hours earlier, now felt like a stage. Every corner seemed like it could be compromised. I felt like eyes were on me from every angle, even though I couldn't see them. We packed our things immediately, stuffing clothes into bags without folding, tossing toiletries into backpacks. I checked the windows before leaving, making sure no one was outside. Every sound from the neighborhood, the crunch of gravel, the distant bark of a dog, felt sharper, heavier. I couldn't tell if someone was waiting. When we walked out to the car, the air was cold, and I kept glancing at the house, half expecting the door to open and someone to step out. But no one did. We loaded our bags, got into the car, and drove away without looking back. We didn't have another place lined up, so we found a cheap motel off the highway and checked in. The room was dingy and smelled faintly of smoke, but I felt safer there. At least the walls and ceiling looked plain, with no strange devices staring down at me. Later, sitting in that motel bed, I thought about everything. The listing had been vague. The host had barely any personal information on their profile. The reviews had been short, almost too short, as if they were written quickly without detail. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it had been set up to trap people exactly like us. People looking for something cheap, quiet, and private. What unsettled me most wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the intent behind it. Someone had gone through the effort of buying hidden camera smoke detectors, installing them throughout the house, and renting it out knowing strangers would use the space like it was their own. That wasn't an accident. It was planned. The footage had to go somewhere, either live-streamed or stored for later. The thought of being recorded in one of the most private settings, unknowingly, left me with a hollow feeling I couldn't shake. We reported the listing afterward, but I'll never know what happened to the footage that was already taken. Did someone have copies saved on a computer? Was it sold or posted somewhere online? Those questions still hang in the back of my mind. What I do know is that I'll never look at Airbnbs the same way again. Now, when I walk into any rental, I scan everything: the ceilings, the outlets, the vents, the mirrors. I don't trust smoke detectors or alarm clocks or even picture frames without checking them. That experience showed me how vulnerable it is to step into someone else's property and assume it's private. The house looked harmless in photos, but once inside, I learned that privacy can be an illusion. The hidden cameras weren't obvious unless you looked closely, and most people wouldn't. Most people would stay there, live in that space, and never realize they were being watched the entire time. For me, it was a wake-up call. I walked away unsettled but unharmed. But the idea that someone had been watching, recording, while we stayed in that bedroom, while we moved through that house, is something that I'll never forget. It felt like being robbed of safety in a place that was supposed to give it. And that's why, whenever I think of that Airbnb, I don't remember the kitchen or the couch or the clean sheets. I remember the black lenses hidden in the ceiling, quietly watching every moment we thought was private. I booked the Airbnb because I wanted a quiet place to stay for a long weekend. It was described as a cozy little house, just outside the city, with modern updates and a private yard. The photos looked nice. Clean walls, a neat kitchen, and a bright bathroom with a big mirror above the sink. I thought it looked perfect. When I arrived, everything seemed normal at first. The key was in a lockbox by the door, and the code worked fine. The living room was small but tidy, with a couch and a television. The kitchen had just enough space for one person to cook comfortably. The bedroom was simple, with a queen bed and a dresser. It all matched the photos, except for little things like a faint smell of mildew in the hall and some scratches on the floorboards that hadn't been visible online. The bathroom was what caught my attention almost immediately. It was larger than I expected, with tiled floors and a wide counter. The mirror above the sink stretched nearly the full length of the wall. At first glance, it seemed like a nice upgrade compared to the small, square mirrors you usually see in rentals. But when I stood in front of it, something about it felt off. The reflection was clear enough, but the glass looked darker than normal. Not dirty, just tinted in a way that didn't feel right. When I leaned closer, the reflection didn't change much, but the way the light bounced back at me seemed wrong. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably just a cheap mirror. That night, after unpacking and eating something simple, I went back into the bathroom to shower. With the light on and the door closed, I noticed it again. The mirror didn't reflect light the way it should. Instead of bouncing back brightly, it looked almost like the glass was absorbing some of it. I turned off the bathroom light for a second and noticed that the mirror didn't go completely black. A faint, almost imperceptible glow came from behind it. That was when I froze. I had read about two-way mirrors before, but I had never thought I'd see one in real life. The thought shot through me in an instant. Someone could be on the other side. Someone could be watching. I pressed my hand against the glass. It was cold, colder than the air in the bathroom. Then I tried the old trick I'd heard of, pressing my fingertip to the surface. Normally, with a regular mirror, there's a small gap between your finger and its reflection. But here, my fingertip touched its reflection directly, no gap at all. My chest tightened. The idea that the bathroom mirror wasn't just a mirror but a window made my stomach twist. I stood there for a long time, my hands still on the glass, debating whether I wanted to know what was behind it. Finally, I pulled myself together and looked around. The mirror's frame was screwed into the wall. I checked the edges, and sure enough, there was a tiny draft slipping through one side. Air was moving behind it. That meant space back there. I grabbed the small screwdriver from my car kit. I had it in my bag because I travel a lot, and began loosening the screws. My hands shook the entire time. When I finally pulled the frame away, the mirror came loose from the wall, heavier than I expected. Behind it was not just wiring or insulation, but a dark opening. It was a crawl space, narrow, dusty, and just tall enough for someone to crouch inside. A faint smell of stale air and old wood came out when I opened it. I aimed the flashlight on my phone inside and felt my throat tighten. There were scuff marks on the floorboards in the crawl space, like someone had been moving around in there. A couple of empty water bottles were pushed into a corner, along with a crumpled blanket. The worst part was that the crawl space stretched further back, out of sight. That was when it fully hit me. This wasn't just some forgotten construction quirk. Someone had been in there, and they had been there recently. The mirror wasn't decoration. It was set up so they could watch whoever was in the bathroom. My nerves spiked hard. I pushed the mirror back into place, not even bothering to rescrew it tightly. I didn't want whoever had set that up to know I had discovered it. But once I knew it was there, I couldn't relax in the house at all. Every creak made me jump. Every shadow made me think someone was moving in the crawl space. I tried to convince myself maybe it was abandoned, maybe no one had been there in a long time. But the blanket and bottles were too fresh. And the thought that someone had gone to the trouble of building a two-way mirror in a bathroom wasn't the kind of thing you just forget about. That night, I couldn't bring myself to shower. I couldn't even brush my teeth comfortably. I used the kitchen sink instead and slept in my clothes with the lights on, my bag packed beside me. Every sound the house made, pipes groaning with settling, I convinced myself was someone shifting behind that wall. By morning, I couldn't stand it. I left the house as quickly as I could, barely touching anything on my way out. I drove to the nearest coffee shop and sat in the parking lot for an hour, debating what to do. I didn't want to go back, but I also didn't want to just walk away without reporting it. Finally, I messaged the rental platform with everything I had found. I explained about the mirror, the crawl space, the bottles and blanket. I didn't care if the host got angry. I wasn't staying there another night. The platform promised to investigate, and they refunded me, but that didn't erase the feeling that stayed with me afterward. The thought that someone had likely been on the other side of that mirror, watching countless guests without them ever knowing, made me feel sick. Hotels might be bland and crowded, but at least I know the mirrors are mirrors, the walls are solid, and no one is hiding in crawl spaces with a direct view into the bathroom. That Airbnb changed how I look at every place I stay in now. I tap on mirrors. I check walls for drafts. I search for hidden gaps. I can't step into a bathroom without wondering who might be on the other side of the glass. The worst part isn't even the idea that I found it. The worst part is wondering how many people didn't. How many others used that bathroom without realizing they were being watched the entire time. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheaper than a hotel, and I needed a quiet place to stay for a few nights while traveling for work. The listing made it sound perfect. It was a small guest house on the edge of a property, separated from the main house by some trees. The pictures showed a neat little cabin-style place with a simple bed, a small kitchen, and a desk where I could set up my laptop. The reviews were decent enough, nothing alarming, and I didn't think twice about reserving it. When I arrived, the first impression wasn't bad. The host, an older man, greeted me in the driveway when I pulled up. He didn't say much, just pointed me toward the guest house and gave me a short wave. He seemed quiet, maybe awkward, but I didn't care as long as the place was as described. The guest house was a small one-room setup with wood-paneled walls, a bed pushed against one side, and a window that looked out toward a patch of trees. There was also a back window that faced the main house, though it was far enough that I thought I'd have plenty of privacy. The first evening was uneventful. I made myself some food, answered emails at the desk, and went to bed early. But I remember waking up once in the middle of the night for no real reason. I opened my eyes and glanced toward the window that faced the trees. At first, I thought I saw something, a shadow maybe, but my eyes were blurry, and I convinced myself it was just the branches moving in the wind. I turned over and fell back asleep. The second night was when things shifted. I had stayed up late working, and by the time I shut everything down, it was nearly midnight. The property was completely dark outside, no streetlights nearby, and the only light came from the small lamp inside the guest house. As I climbed into bed, I felt uneasy for the first time. It was that kind of stillness where every little sound, like the creak of the wood or the faint hum of the refrigerator, felt too loud. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, trying to relax. After a while, I rolled onto my side and happened to glance at the window. That was when my chest tightened. There was someone standing outside. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no, the figure was clear. A man was standing perfectly still, just outside the window, his face barely visible but close enough that I could tell he was staring in. The outline of his shoulders, his head, the way he wasn't moving at all, it froze me in place. My body went stiff and I didn't dare move a muscle. The light from the moon gave enough glow that I could make out more as my eyes adjusted. It was the host, the same man who had waved at me when I arrived. He wasn't knocking or saying anything. He was just standing there, silently watching through the glass. Every instinct in me screamed to get up, to shout, to do something, but I couldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I didn't understand why he was there. There was no reason for him to be outside my window at midnight. He should have been in his own house, asleep, minding his own business. I lay there, pretending to be asleep, my breathing slow and steady, though inside I was spiraling. I thought about reaching for my phone on the nightstand, but I didn't want him to notice me move. I thought about getting up and turning on the light, but the idea of locking eyes with him, confirming that I knew he was there, terrified me. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. He never moved. He just stood there, as if waiting for something. I kept my gaze unfocused, my eyelids lowered, making it seem like I was half asleep. Finally, after what felt like forever, I blinked, and he was gone. One moment he was there, and the next the space outside the window was empty. I stayed frozen for a long time after that, straining to hear footsteps or any sound that might tell me where he had gone. Nothing, just silence, thick and heavy. The rest of that night I didn't sleep. I lay rigid on the bed until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. When the sun finally rose, I got up, paced the room, and tried to convince myself that maybe I had imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I could still see his face in my mind, pale and expressionless, staring in at me without blinking. I decided I would leave. I didn't care that I had another night booked. I couldn't stay there. I started packing up my bag, moving quickly, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that I was still being watched. When I walked outside toward my car, I glanced up at the main house. The front door was closed, but one of the upstairs windows was cracked open. I couldn't see clearly, but I had the unsettling feeling someone was standing just inside, hidden by the curtains. Driving away, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station several miles down the road. I sat there for a long time trying to calm down, sipping a coffee I didn't even taste. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That the host had stood outside my window at night? It sounded strange, maybe even paranoid, unless someone else had seen it too. Later, I reported it to the rental platform. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I explained exactly what I saw, how he had been standing there in the dark, silently watching. They refunded me, but their polite apology didn't make me feel any better. It didn't erase the memory of that pale face on the other side of the glass. That trip changed how I look at places I stay. Now, whenever I book somewhere, I inspect every window, every blind, every curtain. At night, I keep the lights low and the curtains drawn tight, double-checking the locks again and again. The thing that unsettles me most isn't that he was there. It's that he was so quiet about it. No knock, no excuse, no words. Just standing there in the dark, as if it was something he had done before, as if watching his guests was part of a routine. And I'll never know how long he had been there before I noticed, or if he had been watching me on the first night too, when I thought I saw movement outside but brushed it off as shadows. I left that Airbnb behind, but I still feel it sometimes when I lie down in bed. The sense that someone is on the other side of the glass, standing completely still, waiting for me to notice. I booked the Airbnb because it seemed like a good deal. The photos showed a small one-bedroom house, clean and simple, with a kitchen, living room, and backyard. The description said entire place, which I liked because I wanted privacy. I planned to use the time to work remotely and relax away from the noise of my apartment. The reviews were short but positive, just comments like quiet stay and easy check-in. I didn't think much of it at the time. When I arrived, the house looked just like the photos. It sat on a quiet street with a few other houses spread out along the block. The grass in the front yard was a little overgrown, but the exterior looked fine. There was a key in a lockbox by the door, and I let myself in. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It didn't smell freshly cleaned like most rentals. It smelled lived in, like cooking oil, old laundry, and faint cigarette smoke. The living room was cluttered with items that hadn't been in the photos. A pair of sneakers by the couch, a jacket draped over a chair, and a half-empty glass of water on the coffee table. At first, I thought maybe the cleaners had left something behind, but the details added up in a way that didn't make sense. I walked through slowly. In the kitchen, there were dishes drying on the rack. In the fridge, cartons and jars that looked half-used. The bedroom had a neatly made bed, but the closet door was open, and clothes were hanging inside. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't staged for guests. Someone was living here. For a moment, I wondered if I had walked into the wrong house. I checked the address again on my phone, then looked at the listing. It matched perfectly. This was supposed to be mine for the week, yet it didn't feel empty. As I turned back toward the living room, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. A door I hadn't seen in the photos, what looked like a basement door, was shut, and from behind it came the faint hum of a television. Not loud, but just enough to tell me someone was down there. My stomach dropped. I froze in place, my mind racing. The listing had said entire place. No mention of shared spaces. No note about the host being on site. Yet it was clear. The owner was still living here. Not only living here, but downstairs at that very moment. I stood silently for a while, every instinct telling me I wasn't supposed to be here in the way I thought. The jacket, the shoes, the food in the fridge. It all made sense now. I wasn't a guest in an empty rental. I had just walked into someone else's home. I tried to shake off the panic by thinking it through. Maybe the host just hadn't updated the listing. Maybe they didn't mean harm. But that didn't make me feel better. If they hadn't mentioned it, that meant they didn't want guests to know. And if they didn't want guests to know, then what else were they hiding? The worst part was the layout of the house. The basement door opened directly into the living room. If the owner decided to come up, they would walk right into the space where I was supposed to be sleeping. No lock on the door, no barrier, just stairs leading up into what was advertised as my rental. I spent the next hour pretending to get settled, but I couldn't relax. Every creak of the floorboards made me stiffen. Every muffled sound from downstairs reminded me I wasn't alone. I moved my bag into the bedroom but didn't unpack. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closet full of clothes that weren't mine, wondering how I was supposed to sleep knowing a stranger lived beneath me. By evening, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I heated up something small in the kitchen, but even that felt wrong. I was using someone else's stove, someone else's pans, while they sat below me, probably aware I was up here. The blinds in the living room were tilted open, and I kept checking outside, half expecting to see the host walking around in the yard. When it got dark, I tried to prepare for the night. I locked the front door, though the flimsy bolt didn't make me feel safer. I looked at the basement door again. No lock. I thought about moving a chair in front of it, but it wouldn't do much. The idea of lying in bed while the owner had full access to the house made my skin crawl. I lay down anyway, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept picturing footsteps on the stairs, the door opening, someone standing in the dark living room watching me. I must have drifted off for a short time, because the next thing I remember was waking up to a sound. Faint creak. My eyes snapped open, and I stared at the ceiling. The house was silent again, but the sound had been real. It hadn't come from outside. It had come from inside. I didn't move for a long time. My ears strained for any noise. Nothing. just silence, heavy and suffocating. My body refused to relax. Eventually, I sat up and checked the living room. The basement door was still shut, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone had tested the steps, just enough to see if I was asleep. That was the breaking point. I packed my bag quietly, shoving everything inside without caring about order. I slipped on my shoes and left the house in the middle of the night. The air outside was cold, but the relief I felt stepping out of that place was stronger than the chill. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove until I found a motel by the highway. The motel was noisy and smelled faintly of mildew, but I felt safer there than I had in that Airbnb. At least in the motel, I knew the space was mine. No hidden resident in the basement. No strange belongings in the closet. The next morning, I looked back at the listing and realized how carefully it had been worded. Entire place was written, but no photos of the basement. The reviews had been vague, probably because other guests didn't want to cause trouble or didn't notice what was happening. It wasn't an accident. The host had deliberately left out the fact that they lived there. That experience changed the way I see Airbnbs. Now, I look at every listing with suspicion. I read the reviews carefully, searching for any hint that the host might still be on the property. I check the photos for missing angles, doors that don't seem to lead anywhere, anything that looks like it's been cropped out. The thought that stayed with me wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the risk. Sleeping in a house where the owner was secretly living downstairs meant I had no control. They had the advantage. They could walk upstairs whenever they wanted. I didn't know them, and they knew everything about the layout of that house, every lock, every exit. I'll never forget the feeling of lying there, staring at the basement door, knowing someone else was behind it, someone who hadn't told me they'd be there, someone who had already hidden that truth. That feeling of being trapped in someone else's home while pretending it was mine is something I won't repeat. Since then, I've stuck to hotels. They might be noisy, crowded, or expensive, but at least I know what I'm walking into. At least I know I'm not sleeping above a stranger in their own house, waiting for the sound of footsteps on the stairs. I booked an Airbnb because it was cheaper than a hotel, and I needed somewhere to stay for a work trip. The place I picked was a small one-bedroom guest house behind someone's home. It looked simple in the pictures. Plain white walls, clean sheets, a little kitchen, nothing fancy. The reviews were short, just people saying things like, quiet stay and easy check-in. Nothing that stood out as a warning. When I pulled into the driveway, the main house looked older, maybe from the 70s, with peeling paint and overgrown bushes. The guest house sat in the back, a separate little structure with its own door. The path leading to it was uneven concrete slabs through weeds that brushed at my legs as I walked down. The lockbox was hanging from the doorknob, and I let myself in. Inside, it smelled faintly of damp wood. The living area was one open space with a couch, a table, and a kitchenette. The bedroom was off to the side with a queen bed that sagged a little in the middle. There was a bathroom tucked in the corner with a shower stall. Everything looked used, but not terrible. It felt like the kind of place someone had thrown together to make extra money, not a carefully maintained rental. Still, I told myself it was fine. I only needed it for 3 nights. The first evening, I went out to grab dinner, came back, and tried to settle in. The blinds on the windows were thin and didn't cover the glass fully. From outside, anyone could see in if the lights were on. That made me uncomfortable, so I switched off the main lights and used a small lamp instead. I ate at the little table, then watched some TV on my laptop until I got tired. When I went to bed, I locked the front door and double-checked it. The lock was flimsy, just a simple knob lock and a cheap deadbolt. The windows had no locks at all, only the blinds. Lying in bed, I noticed how quiet everything was. The guest house was set back from the street, and the main house was dark. No cars passed, no dogs barked, just silence. I eventually drifted off, but sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It wasn't a loud noise that woke me, more like the sense that something had shifted. I lay there in the dark, straining to listen. Then I heard it, a faint creak from the floor near the living room. My body tensed instantly. I knew that sound wasn't from me. The floorboards groaned like weight had pressed on them. For several minutes, I held my breath, staring at the dark outline of the bedroom door. No more sounds came. I told myself it must have been the house settling, though the floor had sounded too deliberate. The next morning, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I made coffee in the little kitchen and sat at the table. That's when I noticed something off. The bathroom door was slightly open. I knew I had left it shut the night before, because the door stuck at the bottom and I'd pushed it closed hard after brushing my teeth. I sat there staring at it, trying to convince myself maybe I had left it cracked without realizing. Still, the thought it might have been opened after I went to bed stayed with me. I went out most of the day to work and didn't come back until evening. When I walked into the guest house, I felt something different in the air. It was subtle, like the room had been disturbed. My backpack, which I had left against the wall, was now angled differently, leaning against the couch. I knew I hadn't touched it. I checked inside, but nothing seemed missing. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been in the space while I was gone. That night, I locked up tighter, shoving a chair under the doorknob as a makeshift barrier. I left the bathroom light on so the entire place wasn't in total darkness. I lay in bed, restless, listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. A faint creak on the floor, followed by what sounded like the quiet scrape of fabric, like someone brushing against the couch. My chest tightened as I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling. The chair at the door made me feel slightly safer, but it didn't explain how anyone could have gotten inside in the first place. I barely slept and left early in the morning. I spent the entire day out, stretching it until nearly midnight before coming back. When I finally returned, I noticed right away that the blinds on one of the windows were tilted open more than before. I had made sure they were all tilted down. Now, one set was angled up slightly, enough that someone outside could look in. That detail rattled me more than anything else so far. I packed my bag that night, planning to leave first thing in the morning. Still, I had to get through one more night. I moved the table against the door this time and stayed awake as long as I could with the lamp on. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, and I woke to a soft noise. My eyes opened and I froze. It was the sound of the blinds shifting again. Just the faintest clink of the thin slats moving. I didn't move. I stared toward the living room, where the dim lamp cast weak light. The blinds near the sliding window trembled, just slightly, like someone's hand had brushed them. I didn't see a figure, but the movement was real. My whole body locked up. After a few moments, it stopped. No more sound, no more movement, but I knew what I had seen. At dawn, I grabbed my things and left. I didn't even look back at the guest house. I drove straight to a chain hotel and paid the higher rate. It felt like a relief just to have solid doors, a proper lock, and security cameras outside. Thinking about it afterward, I realized the guest house was easy to access. The flimsy lock, the unlatched windows, the fact it sat at the back of the property with no street visibility. Anyone could have slipped in while I was gone or even while I slept. The little signs, the bathroom door moved, the bag shifted, the blinds disturbed, pointed to someone coming and going quietly, maybe with a spare key, maybe through an unlocked window. I'll never know if it was the host, a neighbor, or someone else who knew the layout. What I do know is that I wasn't alone in that Airbnb. Someone had been inside while I was staying there, close enough to move things, close enough to stand near the blinds while I lay just feet away. That thought has stuck with me more than anything, the feeling of being observed in a space I thought was mine for those nights. Now, I never book places like that anymore. I stick to hotels, where the locks are solid, the staff is accountable, and the chances of someone slipping in unnoticed are much smaller. That Airbnb taught me the hard way that sometimes the danger isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and close enough that you only notice it in the small shifts that tell you you're not really alone. I booked an Airbnb because it was cheaper than a hotel, and I needed somewhere to stay for a work trip. The place I picked was a small one-bedroom guest house behind someone's home. It looked simple in the pictures, plain white walls, clean sheets, a little kitchen, nothing fancy. The reviews were short, just people saying things like, quiet stay and easy check-in. Nothing that stood out as a warning. When I pulled into the driveway, the main house looked older, maybe from the 70s, with peeling paint and overgrown bushes. The guest house sat in the back, a separate little structure with its own door. The path leading to it was uneven concrete slabs through weeds that brushed at my legs as I walked down. The lockbox was hanging from the doorknob, and I let myself in. Inside, it smelled faintly of damp wood. The living area was one open space with a couch, a table, and a kitchenette. The bedroom was off to the side with a queen bed that sagged a little in the middle. There was a bathroom tucked in the corner with a shower stall. Everything looked used, but not terrible. It felt like the kind of place someone had thrown together to make extra money, not a carefully maintained rental. Still, I told myself it was fine. I only needed it for 3 nights. The first evening, I went out to grab dinner, came back, and tried to settle in. The blinds on the windows were thin and didn't cover the glass fully. From outside, anyone could see in if the lights were on. That made me uncomfortable, so I switched off the main lights and used a small lamp instead. I ate at the little table, then watched some TV on my laptop until I got tired. When I went to bed, I locked the front door and double-checked it. The lock was flimsy, just a simple knob lock and a cheap deadbolt. The windows had no locks at all, only the blinds. Lying in bed, I noticed how quiet everything was. The guest house was set back from the street, and the main house was dark. No cars passed, no dogs barked, just silence. I eventually drifted off, but sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It wasn't a loud noise that woke me, more like the sense that something had shifted. I lay there in the dark, straining to listen. Then I heard it, a faint creak from the floor near the living room. My body tensed instantly. I knew that sound wasn't from me. The floorboards groaned like weight had pressed on them. For several minutes, I held my breath, staring at the dark outline of the bedroom door. No more sounds came. I told myself it must have been the house settling, though the floor had sounded too deliberate. The next morning, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I made coffee in the little kitchen and sat at the table. That's when I noticed something off. The bathroom door was slightly open. I knew I had left it shut the night before, because the door stuck at the bottom and I pushed it closed hard after brushing my teeth. I sat there staring at it, trying to convince myself maybe I had left it cracked without realizing. Still, the thought it might have been opened after I went to bed stayed with me. I went out most of the day to work and didn't come back until evening. When I walked into the guest house, I felt something different in the air. It was subtle, like the room had been disturbed. My backpack, which I had left against the wall, was now angled differently, leaning against the couch. I knew I hadn't touched it. I checked inside, but nothing seemed missing. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been in the space while I was gone. That night, I locked up tighter, shoving a chair under the doorknob as a makeshift barrier. I left the bathroom light on so the entire place wasn't in total darkness. I lay in bed, restless, listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. A faint creak on the floor, followed by what sounded like the quiet scrape of fabric, like someone brushing against the couch. My chest tightened as I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling. The chair at the door made me feel slightly safer, but it didn't explain how anyone could have gotten inside in the first place. I barely slept and left early in the morning. I spent the entire day out, stretching it until nearly midnight before coming back. When I finally returned, I noticed right away that the blinds on one of the windows were tilted open more than before. I had made sure they were all tilted down. Now, one set was angled up slightly, enough that someone outside could look in. That detail rattled me more than anything else so far. I packed my bag that night, planning to leave first thing in the morning. Still, I had to get through one more night. I moved the table against the door this time and stayed awake as long as I could with the lamp on. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, and I woke to a soft noise. My eyes opened and I froze. It was the sound of the blinds shifting again, just the faintest clink of the thin slats moving. I didn't move. I stared toward the living room, where the dim lamp cast weak light. The blinds near the sliding window trembled, just slightly, like someone's hand had brushed them. I didn't see a figure, but the movement was real. My whole body locked up, After a few moments, it stopped. No more sound, no more movement, but I knew what I had seen. At dawn, I grabbed my things and left. I didn't even look back at the guest house. I drove straight to a chain hotel and paid the higher rate. It felt like a relief just to have solid doors, a proper lock, and security cameras outside. Thinking about it afterward, I realized the guest house was easy to access. The flimsy lock, the unlatched windows, the fact it sat at the back of the property with no street visibility. Anyone could have slipped in while I was gone or even while I slept. The little signs, the bathroom door moved, the bag shifted, the blinds disturbed, pointed to someone coming and going quietly, maybe with a spare key, maybe through an unlocked window. I'll never know if it was the host, a neighbor, or someone else who knew the layout. What I do know is that I wasn't alone in that Airbnb. Someone had been inside while I was staying there, close enough to move things, close enough to stand near the blinds while I lay just feet away. That thought has stuck with me more than anything, the feeling of being observed in a space I thought was mine for those nights. Now, I never book places like that anymore. I stick to hotels, where the locks are solid, the staff is accountable, and the chances of someone slipping in unnoticed are much smaller. That Airbnb taught me the hard way that sometimes the danger isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and close enough that you only notice it in the small shifts that tell you you're not really alone. I booked an Airbnb because it was cheaper than the hotels in the area and I wanted to save money. It looked normal in the photos. A small house on the edge of a town, quiet street, simple furniture, nothing special. The reviews were short but mostly good. People said it was clean and private. That was enough for me. When I arrived, it felt fine at first. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it wasn't bad either. The house sat between two empty lots with weeds growing tall, which already made it feel a little isolated. The driveway was gravel and there were no other cars around. I let myself in with the code I was given and walked through the place. It smelled faintly of cleaning products, like someone had just mopped. The living room had a couch, coffee table, and an old TV. The kitchen was small but stocked with basic dishes. The bedroom had a double bed with white sheets that looked clean, though the mattress sagged a little in the middle. It was only a 2-night stay, so I didn't need much. I dropped my bag, looked around, and then walked outside again to grab groceries. When I got back after dark, the street felt emptier than before. There weren't many lights around, and the house was darker than the pictures made it seem. I noticed there were no curtains on some of the windows, just bare glass, which made me feel exposed. But I tried to ignore it. Inside, I cooked some food, ate at the small table, and tried to relax. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. I kept catching myself glancing at the windows, especially the one over the sink that looked out into the yard. Beyond the faint glow of the porch light, it was just blackness. I told myself it was just because I wasn't used to being in a strange house alone. When it was time for bed, I locked the doors and checked them twice. I pulled the thin bedroom curtain shut and lay down. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but I woke up in the middle of the night. My eyes opened for no reason. The house was silent, and I didn't know what time it was. My phone was charging across the room, and I didn't want to get up. That's when I realized the curtain had a gap. It wasn't wide, just a sliver where the two sides didn't fully meet. And through that gap, it felt like the dark outside wasn't empty. I couldn't see anything clear, but the feeling was sharp, like someone standing just beyond the glass. I stared for a long time, my heart beating harder, but I told myself it was in my head. Eventually, I closed my eyes and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I went about my day, left the house, and only came back around sunset. I noticed something then that I hadn't the night before. One of the kitchen chairs had been moved slightly away from the table. I couldn't remember leaving it like that. I pushed it back in and tried not to think about it. Later, when I cooked again, I noticed the back door lock was stiff. Clicked, but it didn't feel solid, like it could be forced easily. I didn't like that. Before bed, I propped a chair under the handle just to be safe. I checked all the windows again. Most were locked, but one in the small laundry room had a latch that didn't sit right. It looked locked, but when I pushed on it, it shifted a little. That night, I fell asleep more carefully. Again, I woke up sometime after midnight. I lay still, my ears straining. The house made faint sounds, the kind every house does. But then I caught something sharper. A soft creak, like weight shifting on a floorboard. It came from somewhere near the kitchen. I stayed frozen, breathing shallow, trying to convince myself it was the house settling. But the sound came again, slower this time, like careful steps. My body went cold. I didn't move. The chair I had wedged under the back door ran through my mind. If that door had been opened, I would hear the scrape of the chair. I didn't hear it, which meant if anyone was inside, they had to have already been in before I locked up. I forced myself to stay quiet, but my chest felt tight. Minutes passed. The sounds faded. I couldn't tell if whoever it was had left, or if they were still standing somewhere in the dark. I don't know how long I lay awake, but eventually exhaustion pulled me under again. When the light came through the window, I got up fast and checked the house. Nothing looked different. The chair was still under the back door. The windows looked shut. I walked through each room, opening closets, even looking under the bed, but I didn't find anything. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I didn't want to spend another night there, but it was already paid for. That evening, I tried to stay awake as long as I could. I sat on the couch with the TV on low volume, keeping the lights on in every room. I kept glancing at the hallway, half expecting someone to appear. Around midnight, I heard a faint tap. It came from the laundry room window, the one with the bad latch. Just a small noise, but enough. I crept closer, every muscle tense. I didn't see anyone outside, but when I looked at the latch, I saw it wasn't sitting flush anymore. It had been pushed slightly upward, like someone had tested it. My chest pounded. I didn't wait around. I grabbed my stuff, shoved it in my bag, and left right then. I didn't even turn off the lights. I went straight to my car, locked the doors, and drove away. I didn't have a plan, just wanted distance from that place. I ended up sleeping in the car in a store parking lot. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt safer than staying there. The next morning, I sent a message to the Airbnb host saying I had to leave early for personal reasons. I didn't explain what happened. I just wanted it done. Looking back, I still wonder if someone had been inside the house the first night, maybe hiding in a space I didn't check, or maybe they were outside the whole time waiting for a chance. The empty lots on both sides made it easy for someone to move around without being seen. The bad window latch and flimsy back door were weak points, and the little things, the chair moved, the noises at night, the latch shifted, all lined up too well to ignore. I'll never know for sure if someone was trying to get in or if they already had. But I know I'll never book another place without solid reviews and better security. That house looked fine in the photos, but being inside it alone at night was one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. That's how I left it. Lights burning in every room, curtain half open, and a question I didn't want answered about who else might have been there with me.